are ready to get started. Welcome to Leading the Way, where we travel together on the path of intentional leadership. We have one conversation at a time and we meet with different people. I'm Nagham Alsamari, and in each episode, I take you down a new road to insight with an expert guest who knows what it takes to navigate the challenges, the ups and downs, and the opportunities of leadership. Why? Because they've already been there. That's the amazing part. So grab your compass or whatever else you want on the way, and let's start leading the way. Today marks the last episode of season 1 of Leading the Way. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm so grateful for all the amazing conversations we've had this season. But don't worry, because we will be back. Leading the Way will be back in January with season 2, bringing you even more insight and expert advice to help you on this journey as you go. My guest today is a dear friend, Danette Duron-Willner. And she is a dedicated mom, an accomplished attorney and HR professional, and a passionate admirer of dogs, kind humans, and the beauty of nature. As a first-generation Mexican, Danette is no stranger to being the only or the first in many spaces. Her journey has been shaped by her work and determination, having started working at the age of 15. Amazing. Out of necessity, of course, to support herself and her son, and that's what makes stronger people. Danette's career has been marked by resilience and adaptability with mentors and friends and guiding her along the way. Her professional path has been both rewarding and dynamic, leading her to add business owner. Congratulations to her impressive trajectory as the founder of Clear-Headed. She is proud to provide impactful HR and employee relations solutions to small businesses and nonprofit organizations, making a meaningful difference in the operations and culture. Welcome, Danette.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. And I can't wait to hear about your journey. You're so inspiring, and this is why Leading the Way does what it does, because um, we each do our own thing, kind of, in our own way, in our own space. But it's really
Mhm.
important that we learn from each other.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. A few points of clarification. So I am first generation Mexican American. So wanted to provide that. My parents immigrated from Sonora, Mexico. I was born here in the States, but as that first gen, for those listening, they probably understand all the dots that come after that
Mm.
when you say, balancing dual culturalism, bilingualism in my situation, and
Mm.
all of the socioeconomic realities that can come from that. And when I did start work at 15, it was not with my son Peter at that time. I had Peter actually very late in life, wanting to be sure that I was making for my own path before leaping into the decision around parenthood, which is why I was so thrilled when you said, come on and talk about this. And I'm like, I definitely want to talk about this. The real focus of what I think is really valuable to bring to the table is that pivotal point in someone's career, professional identity, when they think to themselves, should I take on the role of caretaker and parent? Um, I don't think it's something that should be taken lightly. And if someone is fortunate enough to time that, because sometimes you're not, sometimes there are parents who are like, well, here we go. That wasn't expected, or they might have feel like there's never a good time, and that actually would be accurate. You're never going to feel like it's 100% everything lined up
I
right
don't
as it
think
should be.
anything ever feels that way.
To be honest, that's the same that you would feel about your career.
Mhm.
If it was queued up and just on par with everything you wanted for yourself, if you even mapped that out at the age of 12, you would find that it's great to have a plan, right? It's better to have a plan than a plan to fail without a plan. So, like, have the plan. I agree with that, but it's never going to be as you had dreamt about or intended. And I think there is a great deal of similarity with navigating a career as there is to deciding to jump into the caretaker role, for becoming a parent. I also realize that so much of this and dialoguing with other leaders is a similar trajectory to when caretaking of a parent comes into play. It's that unexpected circumstance that you didn't really you could plan, but you're never fully prepared for. For my journey and my story, it's really around understanding that decision making and what I hope to give to leaders and professionals of what you can lay out in front of you to make that a really intentional and thoughtful decision to the extent it's possible. I'll say that.
Yeah. What kind, I mean, I know that there's different kinds of planning that goes on. You know, everybody has their own way. They have to take into consideration everything they have in their life, but how can you really plan um for something like that to be
Yeah.
a parent and to, you know, do everything else that you're doing?
I think right. That's actually the question, right? Like how do you plan for that? And I'd say that first and foremost, young professionals should give themselves some credit and some retrospection on how they got to where they are today. So if you
Mm.
are already, for example, as a new and career professional, determined, I know what I want to do in order to fulfill purpose, add value, get a paycheck, whatever that would look like for someone saying, this is the time I'm going to take on a professional position. You're already deciding what credentials do I need? What education do I need? What support system do I need? Who do I need to be in my circle of influence? What type of behaviors and lifestyle decisions do I get to manage, budget, and think about as I go into that next step of becoming a professional? So that might look like paying rent, being a first time homeowner, being the first to navigate graduating from college or degree program. And you might be the first in your family to do all that.
Mm.
So finding those mentors and support system is really critical to even seeing that first step into a career track. That is kind of comparable then to the path you would take if you're stepping into what would this look like if I were to become a parent? And it's similar in its trajectory. You're going to have that introspection and intentionality around deciding if that is something that you want as part of your life. Understanding and gathering
Mm.
information and facts from family and friends and probably mentors. What's the real deal on parenting? Like, how could I possibly plan for this? And part of that thought process is the launching point to preparing. I think for most of us, we're aware that rearing children, and I know, Nagham, you've got kids. I've got a now 17-year-old, but I've been working, like I said, since 15 and since my child was born and even before then. So having that preparation in mind, it's important to, if you plan and are deciding, okay, is it as a working parent that I'm going to show up in this chapter of the journey? Or is this a part-time work, like if you were doing full-time, but now you're thinking part-time? Or is it that there's a financial resource of someone in the home who will be contributing to now paying the bills, managing the finances, so that the career's on pause while you determine like how long will I be staying home as caretaker? As I've started having this discussion further and further now, there's no specific role identity or gender specificity as to who's staying home to be the primary caretaker of a child. So I say this with the most gender neutral ideology now. We've got, graduation rates out of med school, law school, engineering courses that are seeing some gender parity for this first time in generations. So this is really with a gender neutrality lens to it. But the considerations are the same, knowing that there needs to be financial planning into it, similar to when you chose a career trajectory. If you are paying off student debt, guess what? You probably aren't going to go to work part time in a low salary generating position if you plan on paying back debt. And the same financial considerations definitely get put into play when you're thinking about, okay, now I might be going into the child rearing. How's that going to work? So what I want to start the conversation with, and maybe you can lend some insight too, is when you make that decision and you think, okay, I'm going to continue working, what does that mean? There's a lot of planning you can do before you even launch into that journey of parenthood. That if you're working for a company, start digging into the benefits that are provided for
Mm.
the organization that you work for. If it's your own company, start seeing what your insurance can provide during open enrollment. So this begins open enrollment, the benefits and coverage that you'll want to see as you even launch into deciding to plan a family. Um, Benefits around short-term disability that sometimes cover that maternity time period after labor and delivery. If you're working for a larger company, there will be Family Medical Leave Act considerations. If you've been with the company for a year, working full time, that's generally something available to you. It's time to start knowing your rights and what should be afforded to you by your employer. If you're your own employer, it's time to start brushing up on your insurance and the benefits that are provided with that. But one of the major things that I really dig into is understanding the current legal landscape and translating that into young professionals considering launching into parenthood and that adventure. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act recently was enacted in this year in June of 2024. It started, much earlier than that in its initial iterations of what this new law would contain. And it came on the heels of something called the Pump Act. So the Pump Act, there's always been, pregnancy protections as a protected classifications in our
Mm.
non-discrimination policies, both legally and in most companies. The Pump Act was the first to kind of mirror what you would see in other countries, Europe, for example, that protected a lactating mother's rights to take time, have a clean area, a private area, a tranquil area for lactation purposes. It was kind of pivotal because in the US, this isn't a topic that we really have talked about or have seen on public display in places of public accommodation or even in crowded venues.
Mhm.
It, it's still uncommon in this country to see that. So this act was signaling like we understand now the nutritional and emotional and physical benefits that come from lactation. It took years then to get this Pregnant Workers Fairness Act into place. And what this does, Nagham, is it starts to equate what a pregnant worker would need to be reasonably accommodated in the workplace. It's similar to if you have a disability covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, meaning that you have some sort of limitation that has come by virtue of pregnancy or childbirth or child rearing, and you now find that you have a need for a workplace accommodation. You can see that in modified work schedules, needing to take time off for doctor's appointments. If you have a physical condition that is exacerbated because of pregnancy, like gestational diabetes, high blood pressure, and
Mm.
here's one that affects most people: swollen feet, lethargy, foggy brain. Like all of those are actual considerations where you could start an interactive dialogue with your employer to say, I believe a reasonable accommodation might make this easier for me to continue working for as long as you desire. So it's also announcing that it's not okay for an employer to make the decisions for you about when you stop working, how much you work, how long you work, to make assumptions that your exposure to some environments would not be um, accessible to you. That's your decision to make along with your physician. If you're going to be on your feet, if you're going to have exposure to an extreme environment, to have that decision made by you and not your employer is really what this law is signaling as well. So knowing all that, now you've got a backpack we'll call it a diaper bag, I guess. You got your diaper bag that
It's
you're
fitting.
packing, right? With all these things. I'm putting in I know my rights. I know, like, I've read up on the company policies and benefits, and I have an idea now that, yeah, we're going to jump into this. I've signed on during open enrollment and said, yep, I'm going to start paying in for short-term disability because I know that this year, if everything goes as planned, I might be welcoming a child into the world. That really launches it. Part one. For myself, it was a journey of, I did have that consideration and I signed up for open enrollment. At that time, I was in a senior manager role within a Fortune 500 corporation, operating in a dual employment compliance and HR capacity. And I experienced a miscarriage just after the first
Mm.
trimester of becoming pregnant. And when I started this conversation and said, all plans are even then, you don't know what's next. I was grateful to have insurance to cover my health after the miscarriage. Oh my gosh, Nagham, it was, the excitement that comes from, we're doing it. We're going to have a baby. And people at work, it was the first time that I was excited. I'm like, 12 weeks, I could probably tell people. I could tell family and friends, and I mentioned it to my boss as well. And then the heart-wrenching devastation that came from, showing up to have the ultrasound for a second time, but that second time there wasn't a heartbeat. So, oh, like raw and real,
Oh,
like
wow.
you just you it's just a mix of emotion. And it's the time when I thought, oh, if I had only kept it to myself, at least there wouldn't be so many people making, the inquiry about, are you okay? Because I just, for me, made it so much harder. um I still wanted to continue. I took another year and decided, okay, I'm going to try it again. I've got a medical team that can kind of help along the way. I'm not going to mention it this time until later in the pregnancy. And I miscarried again around the same time period. It was still upsetting. I had, in some regards, started reconciling that, like with most things, no matter what your plan is, sometimes there's a larger plan that you don't have control over. I mean, that's regardless of a spiritual faith. It's a understanding of our role in humanity. And so when I had the second miscarriage, it was very quiet. Not a lot of people knew. I still needed to take a little bit of time off. Third time was a charm. Third time, I got past the first trimester. I was into the second trimester and then started having the second wave of considerations and conversations, which was a lot more like change management. I'll say that if you're a professional, you'll know what I mean when you say, like, how do you manage change on your team? Well, you talk about all the possible outcomes, you start navigating a plan to for the contingencies of, if it changes this way, we're going to do this. This is the same dynamic where you're now creating a plan that will forward for the contingencies of you taking leave. Create that plan. If you're a manager of people, understand what you have going in your own roles and responsibilities, and who will now take that up for the 12 weeks, or if you're going to take longer. Craft your ask and be specific. If you have a 12-week plan, for example, about what that leave experience will look like for you and your team, map it out for your leaders
Mm.
very specifically. And in that regard, it is a lot like change management. What are your roles, responsibilities, the duties? How does this remain continuing even in your absence? That is actually something that I have found a lot of young professionals do this. They think, well, my boss knows I'm pregnant, so they must know, enter the blank. They must know I'll need time off. Or they must know that they need to hire someone temporarily to do my duty. Or they must, guess what? Like with most things, if you expect to have a successful career, don't make any assumptions what someone else should know about your roles and responsibilities and your career. Own it, and preserve your spot, claim your space in your career, because that space is something, if you want to come back after that leave of absence, you're reclaiming what you proudly laid the foundation to pick up when you were ready to come back into the workplace. So have that plan. Um, there are actually forms online, hello AI, that provide for you a leave of absence plan, especially if you're a manager of people, that can detail like the timing is, 3 months ahead of time, 2 months ahead of time, the month of, who's taking over. It's something worth thinking about because it makes for the conversation about what you need much easier to say, here's the plan. Now, I don't know many employers and bosses in particular that relish the opportunity to now do your job while you're out on leave. However, there are most leaders that recognize the opportunity to really value the person as a contributing member of a team who now has this heart's desire to start on a journey of being a parent. And that kind of leader who's empathetic and ready to be available will be incredibly grateful when you come with that A+ plan. I've got a plan. Now, again, that can go in many different ways. I went into premature labor. So there you go. We actually had someone new starting, and her first day, I went into premature labor. So I didn't get to onboard her or train because I was in the hospital. She will never forget her first day. To this day, I could call her up and say, "You remember your first day?" She's like, "Yeah, it's your son's birthday." Sexually accurate. So,
But that's what
um,
happens with a lot of plans, right?
like I started the
Yeah.
conversation, it's really very similar to the trajectory of when you're, even chasing after what do I want to do for a career or a profession or a job, that's going to help pay the bills and
Hmm.
that next stage in responsible adulthood. Um, Parenting is very much part of that equation. It just is, in generations before us, there might be, if you looked for guidance, what do you mean a plan? You just, nobody plans for a baby, you just have a baby. Well, okay, that's true. But knowing that you might want to save your spot, if not keep it moving forward while you're on leave, does take planning. And it's strategic. It's really strategic. A lot of people say, don't work while you're on leave. 100% agree with that. You are creating life, you are giving birth, and you are there to bond with your child for the amount of time that you want and need for you and your family, your growing and or new family. The US is so vastly behind in what it affords parents in terms of paid leave.
Mm.
Other countries in particular mandate that not only the mother take maternity leave 6 months, a year long plus, that a father also is required under having to pay back a penalty, that requisite time period to take time and leave in order to care for a newborn child or an adopted child. Some even have for foster care. So we don't have that. So if we're waiting for anybody else to step in and advocate for what we know is best for ourselves, for our well-being and that of a launching family, it really is incumbent upon both father and mother to start thinking strategically with their heart and mind about what that leave plan will look like. Um, I I could honestly say too that that planning that you do in the conversations and the digging into the benefits, that has held true all the way up until age 17 and plus for me. Like there will always be that when I took leave, um I best laid plans. I created the plan, who would be doing what, and I will never forget this. I sat down across from my leader. I pushed the plan. I was working a dual role at the time, that was to lead to a promotion within another department. So moving from senior manager then to a director level position. And I'd already been, with the company for over a decade. You mentioned I'm a licensed labor and employment attorney, so qualification wasn't an issue. It was now managing the timing of going out on leave and looking for this opportunity and saying yes to doing the dual role. Um, when I slid that plan about what the leave of absence and who would be responsible, the roles and responsibilities and timing of who would be doing what, my leader slid the plan back to me. And she said, most directors only take 6 weeks of leave. I I I was
Oh.
stunned and furious.
Is that legal?
No, no, it's not. And I said, I slid the plan back and I said, I'm taking 12. This is the plan for the
Good for
12.
you.
This is the plan for the 12. Um, the consequence for that was alienation. The rapport took a big hit between the two of us. It was difficult for the leader to accept that I wasn't taking their direction on this. Um, it would be another 4.5 years before I got that promotion when I came back from leave.
You know what? I have it down as you were talking. I had a question I wanted to ask you, and now you're kind of like pinpointing to it.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people talking about this topic, and someone actually rationalizing why women don't get ahead in the workplace. Somebody actually who was talking to, he was a professor, um, Dr. somebody. Don't know. I don't remember his name. His answer to why women don't get ahead in the workplace and why men are paid more than women are is because of taking maternity leave, because of the time that they're taking. Men continuously get ahead while women are, well, where are they? They're gone. It's like just physically not being at work and not doing what they're, supposedly doing or supposed to be doing. We know what they're doing. We know where they are and what they're doing, but in the workplace, they're not there. So that is the rationale I've heard from this professor, and I've heard it a lot of other places, podcasts, and people talking about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first and foremost, the woman who was working prior to becoming pregnant still had the experience, skills, and qualifications to capably do the position. None of that changes by virtue of becoming a parent. I think the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act really starts to call into question that an employer should provide reasonable accommodations so that if there's a condition related to pregnancy, I mean, the toll it takes on a body, come on. We don't understand that because maybe you've not been paying attention. I don't know, but there's a real physical reality of body completely changing. So I'm glad that the law passed, and it actually might bring some broader awareness to this. The idea that unless you're there, you lose out on opportunity to continue being valued and continue contributing is this is a little bit of a shakeup to that for us. It's a little bit of a, it's okay that you're not there in the same capacity that you were before. And in fact, it's okay to provide a reasonable accommodation to allow you to be successful in contributing to your work, your career, and the workplace by expecting now an employer to engage in an interactive process to determine if there's a reasonable accommodation related to your pregnancy. That signals that it's okay to take the leave. There are people who take leaves of absence not related to pregnancy, and they also see potential alienation or retaliation or discrimination for the life circumstance that led them to invoke the Family Medical Leave Act, for example. It's the same
Mhm.
obligation, I would say, that carries both ways. If I, as a professional, am telling you this is how I'm claiming my space, my roles, my responsibilities, and providing you a plan, communicating long in advance of that, being aware that I'm looping in the right stakeholders and leaders, then the give back is to assume that that plan will work and lean into it as an organization
Mhm.
and as a leader to support that. So if a leader says, well, if you're not there, then how can you expect to advance? Then it's incumbent on the leader to have some level of introspection to say, is that self-serving to retaining a valuable employee and supporting them as they take protected leave in order to start a family? So I think the give and take is both ways. It's definitely the leader who can, I think it's fair to challenge that it I want this to be seamless. Please don't make me think of you as a parent doing anything other than showing up and working. I that's an antiquated concept that if we're going
Mhm.
to continue to remain competitive in a global economy and other countries are outpacing us in this idea of coming right back and adding value, like this is a conversation worth
Yeah.
having. And like I said, both it goes both ways though, that those
Yeah.
that are planning on taking the leave and making this decision, I'm here for it. I really do want to be a mentor and an ally for those young professionals making this decision. Um, Certainly I'm doing my part through being my own, entrepreneur as I'm working with both large corporations and small businesses, advising that doing the right thing is honoring where your team member is at the time in their life when they arrive to you. You hire them because they're qualified and skilled, but life takes a lot of different turns, and some are chosen and some are not. It's important to lean into it as a leader, though,
Yeah.
for managers
And
to understand
and
the
I
opportunity.
think it does go back to each organization and the leader, and how they perceive whatever kind of leave you're taking. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the way I look at it is if you're saying you can't advance because of, especially, being a mother, it's like you're putting a dampener on family life, and to me, I would argue that, well, becoming a mother it gives me even more experience in life that I could use and put to work, and it should not really keep me from advancing in my career. And I completely, get the point, and I know that organizations want to continue progressing, but I think they're putting the focus on the wrong type of progress. I think the people or the talent, like you mentioned, is what really makes an organization progress, especially if you are an already a talent, and you bring in a lot to the organization. There's nothing stopping the organization from supporting you. If they see, if they have the right, focus and intention, and you coming to me, I mean, with an already ready-made plan with everything on it, it just shows how much you care for your organization. It's just
Yeah,
sad to see leaders not, that pushback in just 6 weeks. It's really sad.
yeah, yeah. Disappointing more than anything. A
Yeah.
few lessons learned from that. First and foremost, you are correct that there is now a body of work and research um, and authors who have spoken about the journey of parenthood really being a value add to your professional skills and development. Whether it be your capacity for time management, for your capacity to be managing dual priorities, sometimes in the eyes of a crisis, the delegation skills that you get from the time, in your career, knowing that if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you go far, do it as a team, like do it together. Um, Taking that knowledge with you and now translating that into the parenting role, there's a lot of transferable skills
Hmm.
that come from that journey
Yeah.
of I mean, you've just pointed it out. If I'm taking the time and consideration to navigate a plan and present it to you, that speaks to my leadership skills. That speaks to my capacity
Mhm.
to think for my team and what will keep the work progressing. It's discretionary effort that you would look for in top talent to come and give you that kind of plan. So these are already transferable skills,
Mhm.
and you haven't even had the baby. Imagine when that happens, and all of a sudden you are playing what I call the now you get to do the plans A, B, C, D, E, and don't get to plan F because that's all bad. It's all bad. But the plan A, as the child, as your child grows, is the if you decide I'm going to continue to work and you don't have on-site daycare, and so now you're dealing with the daycare of a family member or a daycare center or an au pair or there's things to be considered financially and logistically. I call it a small deployment every morning if you've decided to make that decision for someone to care for your child while you go to work, and if you have a dual income and significant other, then you're now, both of you are doing the morning deployment. But that fall, uh, there's a small fever that your child might have, and you're like, okay, plan A, B, C, D, E. Please don't let me get to plan F. It's like, you make the first call to a family member, the second call to the person who is, is a stay at home. And then
You
the
get
third
out your
call,
Rolodex if you're back
like
then.
now you're calling your spouse or your significant other or the person who says, I'm going to be in this journey. Just give me a call when you need help. I mean, and the plan just,
Yeah.
if that doesn't teach you time management and learning how to be resilient and pivot strategically in the moment, I don't know what does. Like, I really can't think of a real life scenario that really brings on those
I
skills.
think, I mean, and I'm sure there is, a book out there that outlines, and I'd love to read it, all the different skills that somebody learns from parenthood, because it's not, it's really, and you learn from making mistakes, going back and working on those. And it really is, it's part of being alive, being a human. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Working is what you need to do to support yourself as a human. It's not the other way around. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations put so much importance and so much emphasis on the work itself and forget that, well, you still need to have a life after you go home.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's very unfortunate. And this is where I feel like we are way behind here in the United States and when it comes to that. And
yeah.
one of my very um wishes, I don't know if it's ever going to happen, is that every organization has a daycare. Why not? You want your workers to be here? Give them that support. It's a
Make it
dream.
affordable and make it affordable.
Absolutely.
There's that financial reality where people are having to make tough decisions um, in a really already tough labor market between the quality daycare, available daycare, consistent daycare. You're correct that if you do have if you're adding value, your capacity to be fully present is beneficial to both you and your employer. And if that means, providing that support, either an on-site or off-site daycare as a supplement, um, I do know that I have friends that live overseas, and their plan is usually like a job share after the paid leave time as an option, flexible work scheduling, flexible work locations, like all of that.
Mm.
There's no reason that it all can't be thrown in as a consideration for someone that's to be valued and contributing to the workplace. I remember early on and uh, in law school, there was a panel of attorneys, and it was the women's law division that hosted this event. And one of the moms was saying, while I was able to make a partner track, you really have to put the grind and the hustle in, and you've got to have the right, resources to it, make your plan. For her, it was always considering the live-in au pair or nanny as an extension of the family and providing that space to say, you're part of the equation now between the adults
Mm.
that live here to care for the children. And at the time, I'm like, I bet you that's expensive. I think that might be expensive. I wonder if that's realistic. And so clearly I'm in school. I'm not thinking about like how much does the child cost. I'm not yet anyway. But I did know enough to ask the question and say, so if that's not the way that parent opts for, either paying for someone to come into the home or being able to afford it, then who else on the panel has experience in what other options are there? And one of the other women raised her hand. She was not with a firm. She had her own practice and her own business. And she put it so perfectly. She said, envision a pie whose pieces change in size every single day. One piece of the pie
Mm.
are the needs of your child, your needs in your career profession, your needs of the other adults in the household, the bills, commute, your extended family, the things that you fill your life with are this pie. And on any given day, it is the complete myth that there will be balance. There's no work-life balance. But the pieces will change based on what you
Yeah.
need to prioritize in the moment and in the day. And I've thought about that over the years. I've translated it to say those are your boundaries that you're setting for yourself as a working mother in the moment, in the day, and year over year, in your career and your decision to navigate parenting and being a career professional. It's the boundaries that you set. Now, that doesn't mean those won't have to shift because you've now filled your life with the priorities and the things that bring you purpose, help you wake up in the morning excited about the chaos or opportunity or living your passion, right? Just know that journey doesn't have to be set in stone. There is that
Hmm.
flexibility, but knowing where you have your boundaries, articulating those early on, and being consistent with what you need and your child needs and your family needs, stick to it. If an employer can't understand and appreciate that, here's the next lesson that was so hard for me to learn. Um, know when it's time to go. Be brave enough to know when it's time to go. And to be honest with you, when that paper was slid back to me, that should have been my first sign that it was time to go. I was also ginormously pregnant and already oozing hormones. So like I didn't think that that was the best time to make a decision. Hold on. But it's
Oh.
the first signal. It's the first signal to where you might want to empower yourself to say, I've been showing up for over a decade and I have this one ask, and my leader in this organization has failed to show up for me. That's that's a telltale. That's the red flag
Mm.
of caution saying, is it time to go? That's a tough decision. But staying, um, I had at the time, it was so my son was born in 2007. 2008 is when the recession hit pretty hard for Michigan in particular, and the big three autos were laying off a considerable
Mm.
portion of their labor force. My spouse at the time was one of those individuals who was exited from his organization as a result of the recession and the cuts. At the that was like at the same time that I'm having a child and starting to figure out like who's going to be staying home. So it worked out that he would stay home. But it also meant that it was not an opportune moment for me to know when to go. Like we needed the resources. I was the primary breadwinner before that, and it would have been financially irresponsible for me to stand up for myself. They didn't show up for me, so like that just wasn't the right timing for that.
Yeah.
Um, but I will say, in my heart of hearts, when I have the opportunity to coach, both from either an employer's perspective or that young professional's perspective, to say it's okay to recognize no when it's time to go. And it might not be right on the spot, but you can, after you find yourself more centered, start taking steps to find that right fit of an employer who will have that value add back and forth. You're adding value, you're showing up,
Yeah.
finding an employer who knows how to do the same for you.
And I think it's important to recognize that you're when you're working somewhere, yes, you are getting the paycheck and the benefits, but you're adding a lot of value. There is so much that you're doing for the organization, even if they don't recognize it. And that's yeah, and I also back you on that decision of not making a decision right away, especially, in that given moment. And it's best to wait until you have digested, the information and kind of put a plan together. I have a similar story. My daughter, when I had her, when she was born, the day of or a couple days, I don't remember the approximate date, but my husband came and told me that he got laid off. And honestly, to me, it was, yes, I needed him home. You know, I didn't care where the money was coming from. He was, I think, on unemployment for 3 months before he found a job. Um, but it really served us well because I was a new mom, was a young mom. I really needed him to be home. We needed to be together, and we really enjoyed those moments. And I was lucky enough to not only have him but also have my mom. By the time I went back to school, I was in college still. I had the two of them even after he went back to work. His schedule was flexible enough where he was able to watch the baby, and my mom did too at different times, and my mom and dad both kind of stood outside waiting for me to drop her off. That's how excited they were. So it's not not everyone has these accommodations and then that kind of support. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and we're running out of time. When you're having a good time just flies by, doesn't it?
I know, right? I have so many questions for you. Like, what a blessing it is that you had that support network. That's priceless. That is
It
that is
is.
time that you can never really recreate with a new child, both for your parents and your spouse. Like, I I just like am genuinely glowing in how beautiful that time period, even though it came on the coattails of some adversity, the blessing in that it really started to unravel. So
A
beautiful.
100%. We were looking mostly at the time that we spent with our daughter versus, what, life, you're going to struggle in life no matter what. Let's just not take all of this into granted and actually focus on what matters. Um, what I wanted to ask you about is something that comes up a lot, and I've heard a lot of, even with people I interview for work, is that some people are actually afraid of mentioning that they're pregnant to a potential employer because of fear that they may not get hired. What do you have to say about that?
Um, I think it varies by circumstance and position. There, depending on where you are in your career, the type of work that you're doing, and the type of employment that you're seeking, it might be the right thing to mention it during the interview. I'll give you an example. If you're in research and development and you know that there's this position that is going to be hard pressed on tight deadlines in order to have, for example, a pharmaceutical actually make it to consumer market, it would be, in my estimation, irresponsible not to mention that you would have to take a leave of absence, an anticipated
Mhm.
leave of absence. Um, it would be the same if you were doing caretaking or had other obligations that you know would come into conflict with the very tight timeline that this position required, and that it was an essential requirement of your job to do. So know the position and know what would be, the right thing to do in mentioning it. There's no
Mm,
obligation to mention it though. If I mean, again, know that the Family Medical Leave Act requires 1,250 hours or 1 year of work before you're eligible for 12 weeks of
mm,
protected leave. That's not paid leave. It's preserving your position so that when you're ready to come back, factor that into how am I going to take the 12 weeks off? Like, is it going to be unpaid? Do they have that flexibility? Certainly ask questions about the benefits, start digging into it early. They typically send you some detail about it to understand if it's the right fit for you
mhm.
in that parenting journey. It would be, you know, unlawful if you were to say, I'm pregnant, and the employer says, well, we can't hire you because you're pregnant. But rarely does it go that way. Rarely does it go that way. It's not so obvious that you are being turned away because of a need to
Yeah.
take leave and raise a family. So I'd say, much like I did the pause on the no one to go, do a pause and evaluate what the position would require of you and what you're desiring as an experience with an employer during that time of it's physically you need prepare for that. It will be physically
Mm.
taxing to do all of the above, working and caring for a child. So I'd say it's dependent on the position and where you are in your career and what you're looking for in the employer and for your own career advancement.
You know
It,
what? I do not think 1 hour is enough to talk about this topic. I really don't. I mean, there's so much more that we haven't really touched upon. I would, you know what, Danette, you need your own podcast just to talk about this.
oh, yeah, it's so some people should just reach out to me and we'll do coffee. Or better yet, let's start finding places where we can bring more people together to continue the conversation. It doesn't have to be just you and I. Like, there's probably people listening to this, like, I've got so many questions. Well, good.
Yeah.
This isn't supposed to be an end of a conversation, but an invitation to continue it. So I'm open to it to see where this can lead to really showing up for each other and sharing this information so that we can really continue to add value in all the places where our hearts are leading us to.
100%. And and like you said, a lot of people may have questions on this, maybe, directly related to how they manage their own situation. And it's so important that they reach out to the right person and ask the right questions. I wish I had you back when I, had the babies. But this has been an amazing conversation with you, Dana. Thank you so much for being on Leading the Way.
Thank you.
And we are not, we're saying goodbye to season 1 for Leading the Way, but we are definitely will be back and welcoming Dr. Olabisi in January for season 2 and many, many more wonderful experts and speakers. And I cannot wait to have everyone back. Hope everybody enjoys the holiday season and stay warm. And I think we're maybe getting snow soon. I don't know. It's Michigan. God knows. And either way, enjoy your time, and we'll see you back in January. And